Welcome tonight to the next event in our ongoing sales and marketing series. My name is Don Morrill. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Technology Council. Tonight we're talking about an overview of 4 sales methodologies. We're happy to have Brian here tonight, who in addition to giving lectures on sales and marketing techniques, also leads our CEO Roundtable. Real quick, I'd like to recognize our 2012 sponsors, Eisner-Amper, Google, PowerSPACE and Services, Ernst & Young, Verizon, TGP Associates, Information Builders, Frankfurt Kernet, IBM, and we have a new sponsor we announced just last week, the accounting firm of J.H. Cohen. I'd also like to give an extra special thanks tonight for PowerSPACE for hosting us. They've got a great facility here. They've been a great partner of ours for a long time. And in fact, we have a special arrangement with PowerSPACE. If anybody's interested in short-term office space that you see here, we have a very generous offer from them. Irina is here from PowerSPACE if anybody's interested in seeing her after the event. Thank you very much, Irina. And so I'm going to turn over to Brian now. I won't tell you anything about him because you have his bio in the program, so hopefully you can check that out.
Good evening and welcome. Actually, I wasn't expecting such a turnout, so it's nice to see such a turnout. Let me ask you all a question before we get started. What do you hope to learn tonight?
Look at different ways to sell.
Okay. Look at different ways to sell.
New ways.
New ways to sell. Okay.
Selling in a nascent market.
Selling in a
Nascent market.
a which?
Nascent. New.
Oh.
Emerging.
New company. Okay. All right. Anything else?
The tension between the inbound and outbound.
Okay. Okay. Don't think I'll get to that one. But maybe we can talk about it. So, all right. One more. I'm not going to go around the room. If it was a smaller group, I would have asked for it. So, how many people in this room are actually salespeople? Okay. What do you sell? Licensed software, SaaS software, appliances. You can just shout out. What is it you sell?
SaaS software.
SaaS software. Okay.
Memberships.
What?
Memberships.
What are the kinds you sell?
Services.
Services. Okay. What kind of services?
Data center.
Data center services. Okay. Managed services. Other kinds of things?
Right. Software, custom
We
software.
sell electronic components,
Okay. Okay. Appliances or just electronic components?
sensors.
Okay.
Marketing solutions.
Marketing solutions. All right. Okay.
Staffing.
What?
Staffing.
Staffing. Oh, it's quite a diverse group. Okay. How do you sell? Is it person to person, on the phone, some other way?
Yes.
You know, yes to all?
All of the above.
All the above. All right. Average deal price. What's your average deal price?
4 figures, 5 figures.
Okay, 4 or 5 figures. Others?
6 and up.
6 and up.
6 to 7.
Yeah.
Okay, pretty
6
big.
and up.
6 and up. Okay. Small ones here? Anybody? 2 figures? Mostly larger. Okay, good. Length of sales cycle?
9 months.
9 months. Okay. Is that on a large, higher level?
Yeah, high enough.
Higher?
6 figures a month.
9 months. Okay. Other sales cycle?
6 weeks, 8 weeks.
Okay. Shorter one? Longer than 9 months. Anybody longer than 9 months? How about you?
Could go 2 years.
2 years. Okay. For it. Anyone shorter? What's shorter?
We're shorter because ours is usually an immediate need. Their CFO's left.
Okay. Is it a crisis or something and they
It's
need something?
crisis, yeah.
Okay, so they got to purchase what it is right away.
Right.
Okay, well that's certainly easier to deal with. All right.
Sometimes.
Are any of you using a sales methodology today? If so, just let me know which one. Anybody using any particular sales methodology
Throw it
today?
at the wall.
What?
Throw it at the wall.
Throw it at the wall.
Get the money first.
Get the money first. Okay. Okay. So that's why you're all here. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Have something the client needs and let them call you up.
Well, I like bluebirds the best, right? You all know what a bluebird is? A bluebird is when your customer, a prospect, calls you and wants to buy from you, and you don't have to do anything, right? That's a bluebird. I like bluebirds. When they come through the window, I'm very happy about those. Hard to do, though. Okay. So I'll go through some introduction to sort of set the stage on this thing. But then we're going to talk about the 4 that I set out in the note. Sandler, Spin, Selling, CustomerCentric, Miller-Heiman. And I'm going to talk about something, which is one of the interesting things about any sales methodology is it's not a book. You can't go read a book and do it. And there's something here very particular where it's about thinking when you're interacting with someone else. And like all aspects of when you're doing that, whether you're doing coaching or psychoanalysis or anything. It's about, I'm going to be thinking about something when I do it. How do you train people in it? It's not a trivial problem. We'll take a look at some other things. I think sales is happening to be pretty complex. People are writing lots of different things, and actually in the last couple of years, because people are blogging and because that's how they get known about it, there's a lot of information out there right now. And then there'll be just at an end, just a few takeaways for me. So, just general insights. This is, whoops, didn't go there. Introduction, okay. When I first started getting involved in this thing, and as I said in my note, I'd sell, and I was okay with it in terms of making sales. And then I attended a course. It was actually on CustomerCentric, and it was one of those, oh really? You really? There's all that stuff? So one of the things here for me is that it was like an eye opener, and it was very much about, I wish I knew that before because it really could have helped me, in a lot of things that I did earlier. Another thing that was going on with most of these that I'm going to talk about, one maybe not, was that they were a response to just how people feel. If you talk about who wants to be called a salesperson today, nobody wants to be called a salesperson because it's a used car salesperson and there's a lot of negative about it. Part of that has to do with the fact that you feel like you're being manipulated. So these methodologies were in some sense a response away from that to what might be called a more humane one. And spray and pray, anybody heard that before? You got one back there. Spray and pray is when the salesman goes into a customer's office and goes through a long list of all the things that they could buy from you. And so you are spraying and you're praying that your customer is going to find something. So this is going away from that method. Now, what was interesting to me is that as I looked at each of these things, and that's what the presentation's about, is that there was something different about it. It was like a kaleidoscope. Depending on the nature of your sale, could be dependent on what you wanted to do about it. And the big aha for me was like choosing a suit. You need to choose the one that suits you, and you're mixing and matching. So when I use the material now, and it's ingrained in what I do, I take bits and pieces from this stuff. Now, I'm going to go through an awful lot of material. Don't expect you to sort of memorize the material, or I'm not teaching the methods. What I'm really trying to do is to show you, here's what each of them brings to the table. Just expose you to the kind of ideas that are in here, and then you could go back, choose what you want to do about them. So there are 4 methodologies, and it's interesting because I was looking back, they're all kind of old in terms of where they came from. Sandler, single sales guy, realized he was doing something well. The way this works is there are, first of all, names. How many people know Sandler here? Okay, there's some. All right, the way it works is there are licensees. There's one in Manhattan, there's one on Long Island. And when I think about Sandler, I think about it very much, and we'll go through this a little bit, one-on-one selling. What do you do when you talk to somebody? And they're very focused on that in terms of the techniques that you're doing. I also think about it as when I'm dealing with smaller orders. Not complex, long sales cycle, shorter sales cycle, smaller orders. Spin selling, anybody? Spin selling, ring a bell with anybody? You got a couple people there. Neil Rackman did something which he thought was unusual, and you'd say, gee, duh. He did research. Most people who were doing selling just said it works. Neil Rackman actually went and interviewed thousands and went on the sales calls, and we'll see where that leads to. But what was different about him was his focus on the type of questions that salespeople use. I find this very powerful in what he did. CustomerCentric, Mike Bosworth did something earlier. Anybody know CustomerCentric, solution selling? Okay. And their view of life is that, and we're going to talk about a switch from sort of what they view currently is the view of how to sell to theirs. But what they're trying to do is get your customer to visualize a solution. So you want them to talk about a problem, but you're very much thinking about how do I get them in their head to visualize the solution. The more you can do that, the closer you're going to be to closing the deal. And strategic selling, Miller-Heiman, people know Miller-Heiman. Anybody here? Some people, okay. This is really the big gun, the big elephant, and this is for the large sales that you're going to do at big enterprises, and they have some really powerful, it seems to me, tools and concepts about it, so that's what we're going to cover. So let's talk about Sandler. I talked about that really it's about one-on-one selling techniques, to me primarily. And what was important to him was to define a predefined sales process, and I'd say anything is that, and when you're doing in sales, no matter what sales you do, it's good to define a process. And I don't know if you've got more than salespeople, a couple salespeople. What you're trying to do is use that sales process because you as a salesman are the aggressor, not in a negative way. You have to make something happen. And the sales process allows you to know what process you're going to go down and also to learn from it. So the point here is to have a process. They also advocate, and this is Sandler talking about something called upfront contracts. One of the things that Sandler got very frustrated with is he would do something for a customer, a prospect, and talk to them for a while. And then the prospect would do nothing. He said, that's not right. So what this notion of upfront contracts is, if I do something for you, you're going to do something for me. It's an agreement. It's quid pro quo. It's not that I do everything and you don't do anything. And part of it has to do with controlling the process. We'll get to that. The last part is what I said earlier, is that for Sandler, it's not the kind of thing that what you do is practice their techniques and you read it in a book. What they actually do, and I'll talk about this later, but I'll talk about it now, is that you go, and I think they have monthly events where you go and you share what the practices are, because you really do want to get these practices in your head. And for him, there are a lot of different kinds of practices. So his model, submarine, but the basic notion he had was this notion of watertight compartments. And his point of view was that you don't go to the next stage until you've solved this with your customer. And the reason for that was that if you go out of sync in this thing, you're going to lose the deal. So the process here was a way of moving a customer along through the sales process, and we'll get to each of the parts. But the big point was, I've got to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. And you follow that along, and the point is you're bringing your customer along with you during the process. So the first stage, and what we're going to talk about with this one is there's a concept he talks about, and then we're going to talk about some of his techniques. And again, he's very focused on techniques. In Sandler, you're going to feel a little bit more like this is sort of a manipulation, sort of what I feel for it. They have some very good techniques, but I'm giving you just, and here what I'm doing is giving you a sample, again, of the kinds of things that's coming out of Sandler. So their point of view is when you're doing this bonding report, and this is nothing unusual, right? When you're starting off with somebody, you need to establish a relationship. And why do you want to establish a relationship? Because you want them to feel comfortable with you. People buy from people who they feel comfortable with. And this technique is, always make the prospect customer, and this is what he was advocating. He said, make yourself not okay on purpose. He gives specific directions in terms of, I don't understand. Even if you have every answer at your fingertips, look like you don't use buzzwords. I think that's a pretty standard one. Allow your prospects to know it all. At the end of the day, though, people feel comfortable with other people like themselves, makes sense. And this one, listen for your prospects' favorite words and phrases and then play them back. This has come into a lot of point where it's sort of mimicking what other people are doing. And we feel comfortable when someone is like us, and there's a way to do that. He mentions it here, but there's actually a psychology behind all of that. Okay, so the next part is, I'm trying to get somebody comfortable with me, and then what you're trying to do at this point is now establish a quid pro quo, because in effect, when you're dealing with somebody in sales, you're training them. And if you're training them to not get involved in quid pro quo, you're training them to actually control the process. For him, it was about, I want to control this process. So he wants to get an agreement on something before it happens. And his point was, you don't want the customer to be in control of the process. You're the person who's trying to make something happen. Be in control. And an example of what do we mean by an upfront contract is a little long. So he's saying, if you have the pain and you agree I can fix it, you'll spend money to get rid of the pain. And furthermore, you're the person who can make the decision. So he's doing the qualification here. But the nature of the quid pro quo is he's going to ask these questions in order to get the customer to make the commitment, the prospect to make the commitment. So, and this is establishing a pattern with the person you're dealing with. The next part of it is the notion of pain. No surprise here. People buy, you say, emotionally. And this notion we're going to get into probably in a more positive way, but get prospects to feel the pain, especially in the present. Why do you want to do it in the present? Because you're trying to create some urgency around it, and then demonstrate you can end their suffering. This is pretty standard with the sales. So he had a process of doing it. Look for a suspect who's well. You can change that prospect to a prospect by change your suspect to a prospect by asking questions that will cause the prospect to hurt. This sounds kind of like sort of a manipulative way to go at it. But really the question is, there's two kinds of selling. There is selling to someone who knows they've got a problem, and that's easier. Then there's selling to people who don't know yet that your solution is a good solution for them. That's much harder type of selling. And even though he phrases it this way, that's really what the issue is about. Because what you're trying to do, especially if you're doing missionary selling, everybody know what that is? Missionary selling is selling something that doesn't exist in the marketplace. It's a totally new idea. And in order to have somebody buy it, they first got to understand what you're talking about. In that case, with missionary selling, if you have something new, the point is that you first got to tell them about what it is, but you got to get them to understand that there's a problem they may not have thought they had. And they may really have that problem. So he goes through a series of things here. He also talks about another technique. Ask a couple of questions, and he's saying first two answers usually are smokescreen, not an emotional response. And this one we'll get into also, but prospect in pain uses words like concerned, frustrated, wasted. And this is really just saying that somebody, if they recognize they have a problem, or if you help them understand that there is a real problem, there's certain words that you'll notice and you can pay attention to for it, to say that you're starting down the process. Another big one with Sandler is that you talk about money right up front, but you're doing it after you've talked about the pain stuff. So the point is that you've already have the prospect that you're dealing with announcing, I've got a pain, they've agreed there's a pain, and now we say we talk about money. Why? Because what you're trying to do is talk about value when you're talking about that. So in his case, he's trying to figure out right here, if you've done that, then you want to talk about budget. And he gives up, and this is pretty specific stuff, and when you go into the Sandler, they'll talk about these things because it's very much, again, one-on-one. What do I say to somebody? Ask, do you have a budget set aside for your project? And going through some stuff here. If no, and he talks about that's not unusual. You don't spell a softening statement because what you're trying to do in this case is to work with somebody in saying that, yeah, that makes sense. How do you plan to make this investment? If yes, respond, would you mind sharing with me in round numbers? If they won't share, then give them a bracket question. Ms. Jones, that makes sense. As you can probably imagine, we have many products that might be able to solve your problem. Some of our solutions range in projects from 3 to 9, others from 9 to 20. Now I understand this is confidential, but off the record, should we address 3 to 9 or should we go for 9 to 20? That's a pretty typical thing for Sandler. Because what they're saying is you're getting a response, it's not the response you wanted, there's another way to approach it. And again, what I'm showing you here is some of the stuff that's coming from Sandler. And this is what they talk about. So this is now decision and qualifying. I'm trying to reach that person. Also, I'm trying to figure out, is this person decision making? Again, it's another technique. And this is a technique. It's really not a bad set of questions. And one thing about this that's interesting is he says, it's okay for the prospect to tell me no, but I want to think it over. For him, that's a no-go. So it's either tell me, no, or tell me yes. And that's what he's trying to work on. Because if someone says, I want to think it over, you go into sort of this no man's land for it. And he's asking the questions. So he's saying, okay, first I want to find that out. I want to go back, and in selling, you're always sort of going back and validating. Review and validate the pay and the money steps. And then you're asking questions. What decision process are you going to go through when deciding on a purchase like this? This becomes a big one when we talk about larger sales. When? You're trying to find out urgency. How? How is this going to happen? What's the process? Because oftentimes sales can get hung up in sort of legalistic stuff after you think you've got the deal. How many have been through the process where they think they've got the deal and the deal doesn't go through? Yeah, right? So part of this is preventing that from happening. And then, of course, obviously, who besides you will be involved in the decision-making process.
Could you speak a little bit more about that? I want to think it over. Could you speak a little bit more about that, why he feels that way?
Because usually that says it usually is a put-off. It's like, I'm not going to give you an answer. It could be, I don't want to make you unhappy. I don't want to get you upset, as a sales guy, so I'll say I'll put it off. Some people don't want to be direct about it. So some part of that is, I don't want to be direct with you and say, I'm not buying from you. So some people would rather say, I'll think about it, right? And then what they'll do is they're not going to respond or answer your calls. So that could be one aspect of it, but there could be others as well.
Thank you.
So this part is What's interesting here is the notion that you want your customer to close the sale. You want your customer to say, this is a deal. And we'll see this again for it. Fulfill the contract, let the prospect, and again, he has techniques. This is an example of a technique. John, we've covered a lot of ground so far. We've gone through a long process so far. We still have more to show you, but on a 0 to 10 scale, 0 meaning you have no interest in my service, and 10 meaning you've already decided where are you. And again, this is an example of Sandler. They've got a bunch of techniques like this to use in one-on-one selling for it. And again, this is for not big sales, but when you're dealing usually with one person. So that was the Sandler, just taking you through we've got the submarine closed process.
I would think a lot of people in here are selling higher ticket items, and they're solutions. They're not just widgets.
Right.
And I can see why. First job out of college, I sold copy machines. That's exactly me. And it can be very abrasive if you have not established a real need, and asking him when he's going to buy, if he really buys, how much he's prepared to buy, is going to get you kicked out the door. Certainly with any of these people that have a 9-month cycle, or even an 8-week cycle.
Right.
So I don't know tactically. I don't know if that fits a lot of people in this room.
Well, and I agree, right? But one part of it is that it is about when I'm doing one-on-one with somebody, what do I do? And I think there is some value in some of the things that he talks about in that one-on-one. But we'll get to the other stuff, which is the larger stuff. So let's talk about spin selling. Again, this was the first time that somebody actually went out and he spent time with lots of salespeople listening to the questions on sales calls. There's thousands of sales calls. And what he came up with was a fairly simple process of a sales model. Preliminaries, investigating, demonstrating capability, obtaining commitment. Really simple. But what he discovered in his research was the best salesmen listened more than talked, using probing questions. Interesting comment, right? Certain type of salespeople want to keep on talking. They use a certain type of question more often, and the most important step is this one. So he formulated spin selling to structure the questioning process. And SPIN just stands for the 4 types of questions: situation, problem, implications, need, and payoff. This is the one that most people think about selling. These are the 2 that he added that are really different and that are hard. So situation, this is finding out facts about the customer's existing situation. You obviously have to understand the context, right? So you got to ask questions. The issue has to do with, and examples here, what software to use now, how long you've been. The problem is that what he found was inexperienced people would spend a lot of time asking situational questions, and they wouldn't get much further. They wouldn't get the deal. Why? Because there's no value in this for the customer or the prospect. You're not providing any value in this step. You're just extracting information. This one is more about things, asking about customers' problems, difficulties, or dissatisfactions. The words are fairly precise here. And now you're getting into what's the issue. And says, these are used more in sale calls, would succeed, particularly if it's a small sale, asked by more experienced people. So again, this is more like if you're doing $10,000 sale, $20,000 sale for it. First step, second step, it could be something that you get to. This is the difference. Implication questions. And this is about the effects, consequences, implications of the customer's problem. What you're doing here, and this is not something you do on the fly, this is something that you do ahead of time, is you think about that if a customer has this problem, what are the implications of that problem? We'll talk about in a minute why that is. So what's the effect does that have on your business? In this case, we're talking about slow expansion, lead to increased cost. So he said these are especially powerful in selling to decision makers. Now we're moving up the chain, right? If you're selling 5,000, 10,000, you may be selling to someone lower in the organization. But if you're selling bigger, you want to sell to the C-suite, maybe the CEO, CFO. That's a different kind of person. This starts getting into something that's especially powerful. Why? Because you're asking questions that the prospect may not have thought about. You're now starting to add value because they may not have understood all the consequences of what the problem is. Now, why is that? Well, sometimes you walk in this case he was talking about a piece of hardware that somebody was using, manufacturing, and you say, well, okay, you come in, and the guy says, hey, that's hard to use. I say, great, I have a solution for you. It only costs $120,000. The guy goes, you gotta be kidding, right? So what the implication is to ask a series of questions about this. If it's hard to use, does that mean my training costs go up? Oh, it's $25,000? You get turnover, employee turnover, because people don't like the job that you're doing. Now, do you also have to get overtime in manufacturing because of this problem? And what about, do you ever have to go outside? What about the quality of work that you're doing? So what you're taking is one idea and you are showing the implications of it. Why do this? Because you're creating a sense of urgency and you're also creating a sense of value. And oftentimes, again, the person you're talking to hasn't really thought this through. And this is something that people can appreciate because they may not be taking it as far as you want. That's the part of the thing where you're looking at what's the problem. And now what you're looking at now is the other side, which is what's the value or usefulness. So if I'm going to solve this, here's what I'm going to do for you. Does it really matter to you? Right? Would you just find this useful? And so he's saying, in this case, when you go from asking about implications to payoff, these are scrolling success, larger sales, increase the acceptance, and particularly effective with influences will present your case. If you're in big sales, you know that oftentimes you're getting somebody who is not the decision maker. And what you're trying to do is prepare that person to sell to the decision maker. This is one way to help them do it. Because what you're helping them do is think through the questions in a way that provides insight that wasn't there before. So put this all together. You've got a seller asking situational questions. Why? To establish a context. It leads to some problem questions. Again, the salesperson has to know about these questions beforehand. Why? Because there are implied needs in this. Implied needs may be, and this goes back to the words, this isn't working for me. I've got a problem with X. It's sort of painful to do this. Right? That's one set of words. But what your implications are, you're trying to transform this into something where you get explicit needs. This is now taking something that was a problem and now translating it into a need where I want it. I want to fix this problem, I want to do this. So it's a transformation process that happens. And then at the end, again here, you're doing the same thing, which is you're not telling the buyer, the prospect, what the benefits are. You're actually going through this and saying, is this a benefit? Is this something that's interesting to you? So when you think about spin selling, it's really about a slice of the selling process. A lot of these things focus on some particular aspect. It may be a process, but this is a particular slice. This is about when a salesman is working with multiple people, what questions you ask. I find these very powerful in the work, in terms of dealing with selling situations. So we're talking now about CustomerCentric. These are the guys who really focused on spray and pray, and it's both a philosophy. But what they're talking about now is changing it from someone who is going to be sort of persuading somebody to buy a sale, to actually helping somebody think through a problem and think through a solution for it. And the big deal about them was having buyers visualize their offering. And the words are specific. You can achieve a goal, solve a problem, or satisfy a need. There's sort of different drivers or urgency behind each of those, but that's the big deal. So here is traditional, and by the way, I thought this disappeared, but I continue to see this kind of stuff go on all the time in software sales. That's what I deal with. So traditionally, you make a presentation, you offer opinions, you focus on relationship. In this case, you're not talking up to CEOs. You're relying on the product. This was the spray and pray. Here's all the features. What do you want? And your attempt to sell convincing, persuading, handling objections, overcoming resistance. This is different. And what this is saying is customer-centric. So I'm going to converse, but it's going to be talking to somebody situationally. I want them to talk to me. This is going to be a conversation. I'm going to be asking relevant questions. I'm focusing on a problem, but also what's the solution. I'm going to target business people. That's what I want to sell to. Seymour's, do you know what a Seymour is? A Seymour is somebody in sales, who wants to see more of what you got, but they can't buy anything and they're wasting your time. That's not the people you want to get to. This is relating product usage to an actual benefit. right? I want to take the usage and say what's important about it. And what you're trying to do now is empower buyers. This is not about selling them something. This is about having them buy something, achieve goals, solve problems, satisfy needs. How are we going in terms of speed here? I talk fast. Is this okay? We're good? Great. A lot of information. So here are some of the core concepts that they have. Some of them I find really, really interesting. This one, you get delegated to the people you sound like. If you're a salespeople, and you're selling to the C-suite, you've got to understand what the C-suite person talks like and to talk in their language so that they treat you or feel like you're an equal. That's a key reason, by the way, why more junior people or people have problems selling up there. Take the time to diagnose before you offer prescription. You know, this is the notion that I'm not going in there and saying I know what you want. Buy from people who are sincere and competent. Don't give without getting. They also talk about reciprocal relationships. This was the upfront contracts. This is the same idea. If I do something for you, you do something for me. For it. Bad news early, good news, no goals means no prospect, which means find that out early. People are best convinced by reasons they themselves discover. This is also like if you do coaching. I do executive coaching. It's the same kind of thing. We all, are better in terms of being convinced when we think about things. When selling your expertise can become your enemy, oftentimes people in the software world who really know their product end up talking too much about their product, and they're not listening to the customer in terms of what problems they have. Here, the only person who can call it a solution is the buyer. That's part of listening to your prospect. Make yourself equal to make yourself different. What he's saying here is you first got to establish a relationship where they feel you're an equal, but you're selling something. So you've got to be selling something competitively different and useful. Emotional decisions. This one's also interesting. Don't close before the buyer is ready to buy. I don't know if you guys have dealt with this. If you've been in sales, one of the issues you get into is what's the right timing. Sometimes buyers are not at the point where they want to buy. Pushing them doesn't get them there. So, for them, the sales process is about being defined and repeatable. And this is also when you define working with larger sales organizations and people. And what they're saying here is that defined and repeatable means that I have consistent and audible input. Meaning that the way you're defining the sales process is an action. Something that you can measure, something that you can see. In this case, it's about, say, pipeline milestones. Sometimes people talk about, well, what percentage of sale have you done? This is really about a milestone. I know the milestone has been handled for it. Focus on the customer. And now we're going to talk about something that they very much train about, which is sales-ready messaging. And the way sales-ready messaging works is that for each industry, so you're focused on a particular industry, you're going to look at, in terms of selling into them, sales policy, who are you going to call on for it. For each of these people, you're going to look at the job titles, what goals or business objectives should they have in that function. I'll show you a chart about that. What role are they playing in the buying process? You're going to position your offering based on who they are in that, and then you can convert features into usage scenarios. The notion there is that you're taking something that is a feature and you're going to be talking about it to help them visualize it. We'll go through an example. So first of all, our roles. There's going to see two versions of this, but they talk about coaches. People know what a coach is in a sales process. A coach is an internal person who helps you sell in the account. One of the things that you often do in large accounts is that you don't know the politics. You don't know who's the good guys, the bad guys. You don't understand all of that stuff. What you want is a coach inside who is going to be your champion in there, who's going to give you that inside advice that's going to allow you to make the sale. Very good, important thing to do is to develop this. You know, these can be product champions, obviously decision makers, financial improvers, users, implementers, and adversaries. Also part of, if you're looking at a large sale, you're going through a selling and buying process, there'll be people who are adversaries. It's good to know who they are. So this is a tool I like. So I'm working with a group out west right now. They've gone from selling something that was $15,000 to now it's a business intelligence tool. They're selling for $500,000. And they're talking to some large companies. So the point here is what you're trying to figure out is it isn't the case that what you're selling is the same thing to everybody in the company. Because of where I sit, I have different needs. And what you're trying to do is say, okay, if this is a COO, you know, what role is he? He's the guy who makes the decision. I really need to know who that guy is. But I also need to know what matters to him. Because when I talk to him, I want to sell him what's most appropriate to him. Now, if you go down here, I've got a financial approver, and this guy says operational efficiency. I'm the COO. That's what I'm involved about. In this case, increased profitability. This was just in time. It was a manufacturing solution. This is VP of production, CIO, easy to implement. Everybody's got a different point of view in terms of it. The purpose then of laying this out is so that before you go into the sale, you try to figure this out, but also as you're selling, you're trying to identify who all these people are and what their different needs are. And you develop a different selling message for each person in a different role. This is their tool. It's a very busy tool. And what they do is they develop this for salespeople. But essentially what you've got up here is who are you dealing with? A VP of sales. In this case, it's like, what's the goal of the VP of sales? Short startup time for new sales reps. So I bring in new sales reps aboard. I want them to get up to speed as fast as they can, right? And what am I selling? Is sales process automation. You start out by talking about today, but then you start getting into diagnostic questions. Do departing, terminated reps take the territory account contact and opportunity information with them, right? So they're asking about a very specific problem, right? When somebody leaves, they could be taking stuff that's important to them away. Okay, so if the guy says yes, now I'm going to talk about an event, a person, and an action. What if, when sales reps leave, right, that's going to be the action, or laid off, you can, this is the feature here, you can suspend password access to all account information and resign those accounts and opportunities, and reassign those, sorry, to an opportunity. So you're going from a problem. And now the question, this is why it's called sales-ready messaging, is you're transforming that problem, what the customer has now said, I've got this problem, into something they can visualize, right? So they're going to say here, it's like, and ask the question, if I gave this to you in my solution, and you're now making, aligning a feature with a benefit, then you're having somebody who's going to say yes. Part of this, you go through this diagnostic stuff, you recap, and then you're confirming with them, is this a solution for you? Again, here, you're not telling them it's a solution, you're asking for a solution. And in that one, it was really a changeover in terms of a mindset about how to think about a customer and sort of a larger sale. But it was about understanding a solution, getting the customer to announce with you a solution, and closing it. This one is the heavy-duty one. Their focus has always been on large account sales. Large also means complex sale, in which a number of people must give their approval or input. And they build their process, what they're thinking on 6 principles, and we'll get into those. How many people here have large complex sales that they're doing? Not many. Okay. So one of the key concepts that they have is that when you're doing large complex sales, the big deal is getting repeat business and solid referrals. So you're trying to do long-term relationships. Interestingly enough, they call tactics what you do in a customer call, and this is strategy. What we're dealing with is to position yourself before sales call. I like that. So you can sort of think about that Sandler is tactics. Or if you're doing spin selling, when you're trying to think about the implication questions, that's the tactics before you go in. And this I really like. So what they're saying is, before you go into the account, define exactly what you're trying to sell. When you can expect final approval if possible, what quantity of whatever you're doing. Be specific, measurable, and realistic. This is an interesting notion, that you're saying it up front. And it may not be what you're going to sell. The point, though, is by saying it specifically, it causes you to think a certain way. It causes you to set a context of questions you're going to ask, people you're going to go after. It's a really very helpful thing. And by the way, if you haven't done this with salespeople in terms of going in, it turns into a really interesting process, because sometimes it takes a lot of thought to choose what it's going to be. 6 principles. Buyer influences. As I go through the buying cycle, just as we do CustomerCentric, this can be more specific. Who are all the people who have influence over the buying process? As I'm thinking about that, I want to identify red flags. Where are my problems in understanding that buying cycle? I want to understand response modes is really the notion of where are they and trying to solve the problem. We'll get to that. Win results is another interesting notion. If you're in a corporation, you're not selling somebody just a business solution, right? You're selling them something that affects their career, especially if it's a large order. The win result's about that. I'm not going to get into this stuff. Ideal customer profile is the notion, and your sales team that you're trying to figure out, who's my worst guy, who's my best guy, and where does it come in the middle, because those are the guys I want to target afterwards. And then obviously creating a sales funnel. So this is a chart I really like. It's a very structured chart that says, when I'm the salesperson, use this chart in terms of thinking about the sales process and fill out this chart. First, it's who's the economic buyer? Who is the person there? Who are the users who are going to judge the job? Technically, these are the people or the no people, right? Depending on what you're selling. If you're selling an HR solution or selling a solution into IT, but you're selling it to a business person, the IT people can be technical and screen it out. And these are the guys I talked about earlier. They guide me on the sale. So as part of the salesperson's job is to fill this out when they're getting into a large complex sale to do it. Taking it further, and they go through a lot of stuff on this, but one is, as you're looking for it, you're trying to figure out, this obviously is somebody who has a huge influence on what's going to happen. This one low. And what you're trying to figure out here is, as a salesman, I only have so much time. Right? And we know that complex sales are very time intensive and very costly. So what I'm trying to do here is stick out where my priorities are. Who do I have to pay attention to as I'm going through it? Red flags are, as I put that together, what don't I know? Because in a sales call, especially in this area, what I don't know can kill me about it. Uncertainty about information. Things that are saying, I don't really know that. Anybody who I was told is part of the buying process, as a salesperson, you want to contact, if you can, everybody in that buying process. You don't want surprises. You don't want somebody that's going to come up with something that you're not going to be aware of. Buying influences new to the job. See, and then these are red flags, meaning somebody who comes in. How many have dealt with the situation where you're selling in, and the guy who's the buyer, the decision maker, leaves? And so you've got to sell to a bunch of people, right? Different, right? And then obviously reorganization. These are the red flags. And the idea here is to be very conscious of those as you're going through the sales process. This is the notion, and I like this. People only buy when and only when they perceive a discrepancy between reality and their desired results. So they talk about growth. The gap can be closed only if quantity can be increased or quality improved or both. Right? So this is a good thing. Right? This is, I want to get to 30% growth. I can't figure out how to do that right now. But Mr. Salesman, you have some solution in there that can help me. Right? That's one mindset. A different mindset, which is the one, by the way, that's the easier one to sell to, is I've got real trouble. I've got a discrepancy on a downside deviation from a plan on a way to a defeat. So if I'm a C person, I've made a promise to my CEO on a plan that I have, and it isn't working. Can somebody come in and help me out with it? Even keel, this is interesting because he's talking about perception. This person may have a problem, and the people around them may know they have a problem, but I think I'm okay. And this one's even worse, right? Which is they think that their reality is much better than what they're into. So the point is, when you're selling, you're trying to sell here and here. This is what you're trying to also discover when you're interviewing people or selling into the process is, where are we in this? This is easier than this is. And this was another one that I thought was interesting that I hadn't thought about. Obviously, you're selling somebody to get a business result. That's clear. But when you're dealing with big sales, what you want is fulfillment, and the words are subjective, personal promise made to oneself to serve one's self-interest. The larger the sale, the higher up in the organization, the more it's about, what's it going to mean to me in terms of my career here. And you need to take that into account. If you don't, you can lose the deal. So what they're saying here is what you want is a win with results, an objective business result, something that really achieves something that somebody can talk about, that gives one or more buying influences, meaning the people you're dealing with is an objective personal win. That's a different dimension to selling, and I like that. Now, this is just a cool chart. This is a chart that says, if you're selling to these guys, so before we talked about in customer-centric selling, what is it that I have to pay attention to? With a coach, You know, recognition, visibility. So why does somebody internally become your coach? Right? Why should they help me? Right? Because there really is something that helps them in the business. Right? It gets them visibility. They can be seen as a problem solver. There's really some good things here. And this is also to note, because part of what you're trying to do as a salesperson is you're trying to scan the horizon to figure out who is that person? Who can I work with? Technical, and what they're doing is, you know, these could be screens best, product meets delivery timely. So here, and there's a bunch of stuff economic, and then on user, this series of things. I just like the chart. It has a lot of things to think about. And so that was the notion of Miller-Heiman. Again, larger sales, complex sales, how does the salesman go through the process? This is just the notion that that's really neat. I can have a process. Well, great. Now what? Oops. Have people seen this chart before? Howell's 5 levels of learning? Some yes, okay. So let me take you through it because this really much applies to the sales process learning. And if you haven't done it, you start out with being unconsciously incompetent. So if you're learning to drive, right, and someone says, make a right turn, you don't even know what it means to make a right turn, right, because you didn't know about it. The next step is you become consciously incompetent. If I'm learning to drive, I now know that I don't know how to make a right turn, or a broken U-turn, even more the case, right? When I'm consciously competent, oh, okay, I go to the corner, I've got to do something with my foot, wheel, I got to think about it, right? I'm consciously competent. The way you want to end up, obviously, is unconscious competence, which is, as we all do now, we just drive, right? It's the same thing here. Unconscious super competence is the guys who are in sports who get in the flow, right? I mean, this is super stuff. But when it comes to selling, a lot of times you're starting out with, I don't know what I don't know. And for, it could be junior salespeople or even salespeople just doing it, they don't know. And when you're going through the sales methodology, there's the first part, which is just to go, oh, I'm now aware I didn't know that, right? And of course, if I didn't know it, the question is, do I care about it? Then the part becomes, and this is the hard part, I've got to be thinking about it when I'm in the sales mode. It's one thing to learn about this stuff when you're not in the heat of a discussion with somebody. The other is you've got to be having this in your head. So part of this is consciously competent, is to have this and operate with it. And that's part of what I talked about. This is not something you learn in a book. This is something that you have practice with for. And then obviously, unconscious competence is you're now using it. It's part of who you are doing it. There are obviously sales people who get this, right? They don't need to go through some sort of training. There's some very good salespeople who do it. But what I'm saying here is this is what makes learning something hard for it. They each have somewhat different methods of training for it. So Sandler, it's a weekly meeting where they share experiences. Spin selling has workbooks, so you can get a book to do it. I'm going to talk about spin selling in a minute, what they suggest. And then part of their selling method is they have workshops. You go to the workshops and you practice these sales techniques. Now this is, I like this. This is Neil Rackerman, spin selling. How he says you might want to go about doing this is, and this is how he says learning about spin selling. So practice only one behavior at a time, isolate it, try it 3 times. Do quantity before quality. In his case, he's saying if you're asking the questions, don't worry about the type of questions you're asking. Just do it, right? You get the feel for it. Practice in safe situations. So this is sort of just trying it. And then it's, when you do it, learn by reviewing the call. And in his case, by the way, when he talks about sales call and reviewing the sales call, there are 2 outcomes. One is something called continuity, where nothing's happened. The prospect could be asking for information, but there's no commitment on that sale on the prospect's part. The other part is where the customer makes a commitment. That's the sales success, because that's what you're looking for, something where the customer says to do it. Anyway, what he's saying as part of the learning is, did I achieve my objective, meaning you set one beforehand? Would I have done something differently? What would I have learned that will influence me? What would I have learned that I could use elsewhere? So this is just his method, basic approach of learning something, and I like it in these kinds of environments. Yeah.
Practice in safe situations isn't learning about, stumbling and falling down, therefore by definition in a dangerous situation?
There's going to be some sales situations where, your business is not at risk.
Not the business, but something's at risk.
Oh, certainly something's at risk, but also you could be practicing with family, right? And just learning about it. but there's going to be some sales situations that are going to be less risky than others.
Right.
But you're right. At some point, it's you got to go out there, right? Okay. So just some other points of view. There's a number of books out there, but what I really want to bring up is that in selling, to me, there are so many different aspects of selling that are interesting that people have focused on. Anybody know this book, Perfect Sales Force? So Derek Gatehouse had the contrarian notion that people can't be taught, that they're only good at a certain aspect of the sales cycle. There may be good people, rare, who are able to do cold calling. There may be people who are good about getting somebody involved and to learn about it, or maybe people who are good at closers. He said it's hard to do that. So his point of view was just that, really what you're trying to figure out is you're trying to figure out your sales cycle and who can do what part of the process, and you break it down. And by sales cycle, he meant, is it a short cycle, a long cycle? Am I selling lots of little things, big things for it? And he was trying to define that process. Selling to Zebras is a book, and this is just taking the part of qualification. This is defining very precisely, how you qualify something, and it has a checklist of stuff, and it's metric. So it just takes that aspect of selling, and the purpose of what he says is that his claim is you can close 90% of the business you pursue faster, easier, more profitably when you use this method of selling. And the last one, this guy Greg Alexander, had a different viewpoint, which was he's very involved in benchmarking selling. Selling is something that you can do a lot more benchmarking about for it. But he's got a whole set of stuff about you have to think about all the aspects and what you're trying to do, and he has a process for if I'm looking at selling, how do I measure it and go forward. So, takeaways for me, if you haven't explored it, it's worth doing. If you're using something now, maybe you need to do it. And that getting salesperson, personnel to internalize, it's not easy to do. It takes effort. It requires commitment along the view. And that's the end. Questions? Yeah.
So just the difference between the Miller-Heiman and the CustomerCentric, I'm not completely grasping that. So what is, where does one fit and the other not fit? Are they complementary? Do they look at?
They can be, well, so from my perspective, is you take a little one from the other, right? So Miller-Heiman is used by much bigger accounts. So CustomerCentric can be used by large accounts, but if you're really big, the tendency is to go to Miller-Heiman, and you train everybody in it. It's a lot more, all this stuff's a lot more complicated than what I'm presenting, right? So
the big idea, why
Miller-Heiman?
Why Miller-Heiman?
Because that's what they're focused on. They're focused on all of the foibles that you get into large-scale sales, complicated buying process. You can do that with customer-centric selling, and they have some very good stuff to do that for it. But it's just it's a different way of thinking about it. So Miller-Heiman, I love the 4-box chart. But I also like the org chart, from CustomerCentric, where you're trying to figure out who are the people, but what is it that they're doing. There's some similar, but different.
So is there a price point then? It's a Miller-Heiman is. What does that mean to you?
I think it's two things. It's complexity of the sale and price point. But if you're doing 500,000 and above kind of thing, Miller-Heiman. CustomerCentric could still work. Depends. Part of this is also what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and what your target organization looks like as well.
Yeah.
If I can make a comment, Brian. I think Miller-Heiman, for anything that is complex sales, the real benefit is the language that goes between the sales guy, the pre-sales guy, the delivery guy, the product manager. So you're calling on the same signals. Before you go in there, you know what your objectives are, you're all in sync. It's not like you have to react in the sale. So you got a couple FaceTimes between the beginning of the sale and 9 months when you close it. You got to be in sync. The more in sync you are, the more they're buying into you. So I think.
Thank you.
Do you know of any software packages or maybe Salesforce.com overlays that can help you manage these processes?
The CRM systems all allow you to implement some form of this. I don't know that I know of something that implements a specific one. As far as I know, people just tailor it. Does anybody else have an answer? Because I don't know the answer. If there's any particular CRM system that actually takes one to do it. I think what they do is Salesforce will have templates. Yeah, they'll have templates, so you could use it. But it turns out that usually you don't use a template, you're going to vary it some way, right? Because the sales situation can be different, and what you want to do is tailor whatever it is to be.
In the corporate hierarchy, if you're not talking to the C-suite, who are the coaches? I'm not familiar with that concept of coaches.
So you're selling them something. It could be somebody in lower down level. Okay, maybe it's up at the higher level.
Manager or
What?
department head or something?
Yes, it could be. That's right. It could be a department head. It could be someone who is tasked with, in the software world, it could be someone who's tasked with bringing in some large scale, let's say a CRM system, right? So it could be somebody like that who is looking at the alternatives to the CRM system, likes what you're doing for it, and also though who is somebody who you recognize has validity within the organization. So it's usually somebody lower down in the organization, right? If it's somebody up at the C-suite, then you're in a different position because you're in a position of power, right? But this is somebody usually lower down in the organization where there's a value to them. Learning how to do this, how to sell up, for it.
It could also be high up in the organization. I mean, I had a situation where the CEO liked what we did, but he coached us on how to convince his team to want it, because if his team didn't want it, he couldn't do it.
Quite so.
So I,
Sometimes CEOs can mandate, but sometimes they want to get everybody aboard, right?
He was very concerned. If my team doesn't go for it, it's not happening.
Yes, I had that.
And he told us how to pitch to his team.
Yeah, well, that's great. Having your CEO be a supporter to pitch it, it's great. Yeah.
Is there a difference or a recommended methodology depending on what you're selling? Meaning between pure services versus a solution versus a product in the software space?
I don't know that any one of them is different. I mean, I don't know that there's something I would use for product versus services. I think you're dealing with the same set of stuff, which is somebody's got an issue. You're trying to figure out, what's the value of that issue in terms of what you're selling to them, and you're trying to go through. I don't know anybody else does, but I don't see it as services versus product for it.
I've taken Miller-Heiman and so forth, and I think the point would be that for the person in technology that is speaking more towards solution selling, they're generally going to be breaking themselves away from their competition and more appealing to the end buyer, because you're not just talking about features, you're talking about benefits.
I think as you showed them, the first two, Sandler and Spin from Huthwaite and Rackham. If you notice, they're both very tactical. So it's like you send your whole team in there on one call and you're pretty much spent. And you have no clue what to do, getting together, regrouping and coming in with a strategy.
Yeah.
And Bosworth, his first one was solution selling. He sold out. Built another one, looks awful similar.
And he's got another one now called storytelling.
Yeah. I think his is very good, but I think a complex, solution-based, multiple person required to sell the deal, there's just nothing that compares to Miller-Heiman. It's just, they're not paying me, but I've paid them a lot of money and they've made me a lot of money.
It's a product champion here. So
it's true.
You're a product champion, that's right.
Maybe that's
Plan.
because our sales are they can range quite a bit, but they can be over $500,000.
Yeah.
But there's still generally one champion. But there's not.
Are they the
not
decision
4 or 5
maker?
people. They're not always a decision maker.
Is there a buying process where you got multiple people involved?
Well, yes, but it's that champion, and the decision maker may be a board of directors, so it may not be an individual person. So the decision maker, the champion may go in front of his board of directors and say, I should be going with this solution. But if the sale is to that person. All the 3 or 4 people that gentleman was talking about are all
I need to talk a little bit more about that, okay?
Yeah.
That sounds a little different, but sorry.
Okay, so firstly, thanks for exploring this wonderful idea of having a methodology to do this. And that's terrific. And I can see the context is clearly the tech industry, because this is the New York Tech Council, right?
Right.
Okay. But obviously sales is a much more broader term.
Right.
It's not just the technology industry.
Right.
So would you, for a minute or so, look at sales from outside of technology? And are there some major methodologies that are not shared? Then potentially,
Let me say, by the way, these are not tech.
I know,
right.
I know.
These are all per.
But presumably, you suggest that the tech industry could benefit from them.
Well, I'm
Right.
in the software industry. That's
Right.
my business. That's my background. So
Right.
that's what I know.
Right.
But it's agnostic, right? It doesn't matter what I don't know. Selling is selling, right? And
Right.
It doesn't matter what you're selling.
Correct.
Right. So it's just not. There's not something specific.
Excellent. So, in other words, there's nothing huge out there that you think you've left out in terms of this
Well, no,
relatively nascent field.
there's lots of sales methodologies out there. So
Okay.
this is for, I think the one that's there's a top 30 list that's out there that I have somewhere, top 30.
Yeah.
So there's lots of them out there.
Wonderful.
And I
So
certainly,
those three resources you provided were kind of like inklings towards that direction.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Anything else? No?
Thanks, Brandon.
Yep.
Thanks again, everybody.